Welcome, beautiful people of all ages, shapes, and colors, to another episode of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, where we encourage you to stick to the basics. I'm one of your co-hosts, TV, aka TV on basketball, alongside my co-host, Jay, aka the Knockdown. Jay, how's it going, my guy? And what is it? Happy New Year now? First episode of the new year?
I was gonna say, been quite a long time since the last time we recorded, bro. A lot has happened in basketball, a lot has happened in life, but hey, we're picking up at where we at the quarter mark portion of the season at this point, halfway point at
Halfway.
this point.
Halfway
Yeah, I mean,
point.
yeah, I mean, I say quarter because the season doesn't really start until after the NBA trade deadline. You know how that goes.
Well, this is a whole new season in terms of in terms of the NBA season, because this is when the freaking trade machine comes out, as you can see with a
Mm-hmm.
couple of our videos on Hit Your Free Throws. But yeah, it's gonna be an awesome episode today. We're gonna be talking NBA Midseason Awards since we're at the halfway point. We're gonna talk NBA All Star starters, but we also have a returning guest on the show. We have Marcus over here from the Give Us a Shot Network. How's it going, my guy, from the Protector Our Queen show? How's it going?
So I can't complain too much.
Yeah.
I don't
Bro,
have
you
the
said
security
before this thing,
clearance
this is
to
above
go
our
any
pay
further,
grade, right?
but it's aside from that,
Different podcast, bro.
I can't complain too much. I can't complain at all.
Different
Hey, man.
podcast, bro. Different podcast.
Different podcast. Different podcast. You know how it is. Yeah, you know how this is when Marcus freaking comes on the show. It's gonna be fireworks. There's gonna be a lot of discussion, and you know there's gonna be discussion. Like, we have a history on this pod when Marcus comes on and talks about the MVP. We already know what happens when that's the case. So it's gonna be a very good episode. We have Marcus on, of course, to talk NBA Midseason Awards, and then we're gonna talk about our All Star starters following that. But before we get to that, we do have to plug our socials. Make sure you follow our individual accounts at TV on Basketball, at Dr. J. Those links can be found in the description down below. In terms of the Hit Your Free Throws pod, I know it's a little bit weird because of the whole TikTok situation, but it's kind of situated right now. Jay, okay, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff with Jay and TikTok himself, but we're gonna try and still post on both TikTok and Instagram, but also check out the YouTube Shorts because we're trying to hit those as well. So make sure you check us out over there. In terms of the YouTube, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you will not miss an episode. And for the podcast networks, remember to subscribe, leave a review on the Spotify and Apple's on the Apple Podcast. We appreciate all of y'all's support, gentlemen. Are you ready to get into this? We're halfway through the season. I feel like we haven't talked ball in almost a month. Let's get into it.
Yeah, definitely time.
Hell
Man.
yeah.
Definitely time.
100%. We're gonna get into it, and guys, we're not even good. We're not gonna sugarcoat it. We're not gonna wait till a bit later. We're gonna go straight into the deep end. NBA MVP. There's three good contenders right now. I'm gonna throw it over to Jay to start off the episode today. Who do you have as your mid-season MVP?
I'm gonna go with the sports books, man, and I'm gonna go with the guy who's my favorite player in the NBA right now. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 31.5 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, 6.1 assists per game, 50, 35, 90. I wouldn't say single-handedly carrying his team in any way. He has a very good roster around him set up in a way that maximizes his potential. But I think the biggest thing is he's definitely adjusted his game this year to not be so reliant on free throw attempts in order to still get to the 30-point mark. Last year he was one of the best free throw attempt. Last 2 years in particular, he's been one of the best had one of the best free throw attempt rates in the league. Still high up there at 8 per game, but not nearly as reliant on creating contact as the way to be able to score on a consistent basis. And overall, team success, I try not to factor that too much into MVP. When it comes to certain things like the astronomical stats and stuff, kind of over competing with some of the team success stuff. But I think SGA has been a model of consistency, does it on both sides of the floor. Yeah, man. SGA is just looking like the best player on the planet right now, low-key.
Yeah, no, he has been absolutely fantastic. And you talk about the freaking record. I think at this point, when you are this far ahead in the Western Conference, 6.5 games ahead of the second seed, you definitely have to take that into account in terms of the MVP, especially with how good Shai is playing. I'm going to throw it over to you, Marcus, before I give my MVP. Who do you have winning MVP so far at the midway point?
It's quite simple. When you look at what he's doing so far this season, as Jay mentioned, he's averaging, what we're talking about, almost 32, 5 and 5 a game or something around there. The last time that a guard averaged at least 30 points, 5 boards, and 5 assists a game, it was Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan did it twice in the 88-89 season. He did it again in the 90-91 season. And in that 90-91 season, Michael Jordan won the MVP. So the last time we saw a guard play the way that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been playing this season, it was Michael Jordan, and he won the MVP. So history is certainly on SGA's side. I don't want to beat the dead drum here and beat over a dead horse, but I agree 100%. There's no one else that you can point to in the league right now as MVP other than SGA.
I wouldn't say that. I do agree with both of you. He is my MVP. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at this very moment, he's my MVP. But with the way the Nuggets are building themselves back up, they are now only 2.5 games behind the second seed. Look, Nikola Jokic is having the best season of his career. It's hard not to at least give him some sort of credit as at least the number two, potentially a number one on depending on the point of the season. I have SGA. Marcus, I have SGA as my MVP. But I'm just saying we need to show some love to Nikola Jokic once again this year.
We're not getting into this tonight, bro. You can't make me promise to keep
what propaganda?
And then come out here telling me something. If we're gonna get point love to anyone else, we're gonna go to Nikola Jokic. Like you can't do that, bro. You all right.
Look, if this was early season Nuggets near the play-in spots, then maybe you're right. But they have turned the season around, 10 games over 500. I can't believe we're freaking arguing about the number two MVP. We all agree. But I mean, like,
showing love to Jokic.
Yeah, I'm not arguing.
No, he's not.
I'm saying he's still pretty close.
No, he's not.
Jokic is... He is in the conversation. He is in the conversation. Again. But I mean, like...
A'ja Wilson was...
There is a conversation with Nikola Jokic. If the Nuggets...
That doesn't mean that players like Nafisa Collier and Caitlin Clark weren't candidates, but there wasn't a conversation to be had. There is not an MVP conversation right now.
It wasn't that big of a. It's not that big of a gap between Jokic and SGA, even though I do have SGA winning.
At the top of
it's not that
the Western Conference, which has been nuts this season. That matters, bro. There's a considerable gap between There's a considerable gap between SGA.
It does matter. That's why I have him over.
Second place MVP candidate is right now. Considerable.
Nah.
I think interestingly enough, Marcus's comparison to the MVP in the WNBA is kind of the comparison that I would have. Similarly, I was big for Nafisa Collier to win MVP last year, but we discussed this on the podcast. I said that although I was a bigger fan of her winning MVP, I believe that A'ja Wilson was deserving of the MVP, and it was kind of clear. It's one of those things where I would say, kind of like similar to what Marcus said, I think the conversation only becomes a conversation if they're neck and neck and we're having to pull straws. I think this is one of those where we all definitively feel as though SGA is like unanimously the MVP as of right now. I think the conversation for number two is where we start to have a real debate of any kind. I don't think number one is close enough to actually put Jokic in that spot. I think their start to the season actually does matter to a certain extent for that as well. Yeah. I understand that there were some roster adjustments and things that took place, but at the same time, this was a team that couldn't close games. This was a team that was struggling against bad opponents in the beginning of the year. And that stuff does matter. We've seen SGA on the biggest stage against some of the better teams in the NBA just in the last 2 to 3 weeks, right? Taking on the Cleveland Cavaliers, taking on the Boston Celtics, taking on the Knicks, a lot of teams that we're going to consider as real heavy hitters. I just named 3 teams that are all in the Eastern Conference, granted, but all going to be teams that we factor into the championship picture. Not to say that Jokic isn't in the same like ilk as that, but what have you done for me lately does also matter on top of all of that. In the last 2 weeks in particular, SGA has more than put himself on the map in terms of being a player that we have to consider not just as like the best player in the league, like as terms of winning the MVP this season, but like his ranking amongst the best players in the NBA right now with the way that he's been able to stack up against the best comps. So I'm kind of with Marcus. Like I said, I think it's one of those things where the convo really starts at who's number 2 than it is who's number 1. I feel very strongly about SGA being number 1. And I actually think the debate between Giannis and Jokic, or where do you feel about Jason Tatum and Jokic, or where do you feel about, some people have Wembanyama. I don't have him as high as 2, but there's people who have tried to debate it before. I think that conversation is a little bit stronger. SGA number one, I feel like it's so definitive
And
that, like, I mean, I don't know.
I,
and
I,
I'll
I,
say this too:
I, I,
I don't have
SGA
too much pushback
in
on that
big
one.
games this year has played big, right? They blew out the Cavs last Thursday. He had 40 in that game. They
Dusted
blew
the
out the
Knicks.
Knicks. The couple
Yeah.
days before that, he had 39. Even in the loss to the Cavs the first time, he had
Yeah.
31. They dusted the Celtics. He had 33. They dusted the Knicks again. He had 33.
Yeah.
Like it's not even just a matter of the Thunder are playing great and SGA is as well. Every game against a team that we expect to be in the mix, competing for a championship or making a deep run in the playoffs, SGA has had a dominant performance. Like every single one. Maybe his worst game of the season, ironically enough, in a game against like, a comparable basketball team, maybe you say is the game that they had against Milwaukee a week or so before Christmas, and when he only had 21 points. He hasn't really had that bad of a game since then. And and that was just a terrible shooting night for him. He was 8 of 24 from the field, 2 of 9 from deep. But aside from that, every game the Thunder have had this season against a heavy hitting basketball team, SJ has had at least 30, and he's been undeniably the best player on the court. So that's the other reason why I say it's not even close, as well as because you look at it and it's like on both sides of the ball, as Jalen said earlier, but also he's actually looking like an MVP in these games. Like his team is being dominant and he's being dominant as well.
yeah. Yeah, no, he's the standout 100%, and I 100% agree with you there. I just think it's a lot closer than you think at number two. I think that for number one right now, if the Nuggets go on a good streak, I think like Jokic has puts himself in a good position. If anything, it's number four, which is the discussion because Giannis is the clear number three. Like at this point in the season, there's just like number four is like where you really have a toss up, but the top three is kind of set in my opinion. But SGA is also my MVP. Moving on to the next award, we're going to be talking about Defensive Player of the Year. And I was going to cut this award before the episode because I thought it was going to be Wemby's to lose, basically. But Marcus, I'm actually going to throw it to you to start off with here. You said like before the show that you didn't think that Wemby was the Defensive Player of the Year. So who do you have as your Defensive Player of the
Dyson
Year?
Daniels is the MVP in my opinion. I think, and I know that's not a popular opinion, right? And I'm not saying this to be different. I'm not saying it to be like cool because I certainly agree that what Wemby is doing is great, and Wemby has been great this season. But just like with SJ, I'm going to just cite history, right? Dyson Daniels is averaging at least he's at like what 3.1, 3.2 steals per game or something like that in his career or so far this season, right? The last two guards to do that. Yeah, the last two guards to do
Yeah,
that.
he's at
Alvin
3 steals. Yeah, 3
Robertson,
steals
all
per
the way
game.
back in
Yeah.
the 85-86 season, he won Defensive Player of the Year. Michael Jordan back in the 87-88 season, he averaged 3.2 steals. He won Defensive Player of the Year that year. So again, much like how I said with SGA, the last time we saw a player do what SGA is doing, they won the award. The last time we saw Alvin Robertson and the last time we saw someone do what Dyson Daniels is doing so far this season, it was Alvin Robertson, Michael Jordan. They both won the award as well. And you can't tell me that it's not because, there weren't great bigs running around back in the 80s, because there certainly were. Right now, I know that Wemby's likely going to win the award. One, because he should have won the award over Rudy Gobert last year, and also he's better defensively this year than he was last year. I get that, but and this is not to regurgitate a take, but I saw a clip of Jalen Williams talking about this, and I'm inclined to agree. It seems like right now, over the past couple of years, we've boiled down Defensive Player of the Year to strictly shot blocking and rim protection. And not that those things aren't important, but in today's NBA, where the NBA is so, perimeter centric offensively, we have to give credit to a guy like Dyson Daniels, who is arguably the best perimeter defender in the league right now. If you want to throw Herb Jones in there, I have no problem with you doing that. I know he just got hurt a couple of days ago, so he hasn't obviously been active much lately. He's going to be out for a bit. But like,
Yeah, he's gonna be out for a
one
couple
of the
months or
reasons
two.
why
Yeah.
to take it to even the Dorian Finney-Smith trade, like one of the reasons why that was so big for the Lakers is because of how great he's been as a perimeter defender, been able to guard all five positions. And so I say that to say, no disrespect to Wemby, because Wemby's being great. But if you're asking me who the best defender has been so far this season, it's not, to me. We in a league that's so perimeter centric, it's almost counterintuitive, in my opinion, to award a rim protector as Defensive Player of the Year and not a guy who's been a lockdown defender on the perimeter, right? We're watching teams like the Cavs and even maybe not so much the Thunder, but the Cavs, the Hawks, the Warriors, even the Timberwolves to a lesser degree, and the Knicks jacking up threes every single night. Like, that's what this league is. So for a guy in Dyson Daniels to be averaging 3 steals a game, which isn't something we've seen in a very long time. I think when I last checked, we're pushing almost 30 years since we've seen a player average at least 3 steals a game. He has to be the defensive player of the year if the league is perimeter centric. If we were still in the early 2000s, where we're still, we're talking about the mid-range and in, absolutely, Wemby's runaway for defensive player of the year. But based on how the league is right now, we should be giving more credit to a guy like Dyson Daniels in the defensive player of the year conversation. And that's why, for me, he's the defensive player of the year. Not because he's been better than Wemby per se, but where are we in the NBA right now? Perimeter centric. Who's the best perimeter defender in basketball right now? Unequivocally, it's Dyson Daniels. So that's why he's defensive player of the year in my opinion.
No, that's a valid option. I have him at number 2. I personally again have Wemby at number 1. I'm gonna throw it over to Jay too if he wants to if he wants to give his winner, but I'm gonna go talk about Wemby quickly. But who do you have as the defensive player of the year, Jay?
Yeah, I have Wemby too, but I think Marcus brings up a really good point, and I saw the same Jalen Williams clip, and I actually wanted to bring it up after we decided that we were going to keep the DPOY conversation on the pod today, because I think it's a really good point. I think it's a really good thing to consider when talking about DPOY in the grand scheme of who we put in the order and how we actually value, because perimeter centric play is becoming more and more like prominent across the league, and it is something where pick and roll, 2-man action, perimeter defense in terms of being able to cover the 3-point line, like Marcus mentioned beforehand. The amount of threes that's gone up has become so quote unquote problematic that fans are questioning the play style. Right? That's how perimeter centric things have changed. I didn't really consider Dyson Daniels as much before thinking about that aspect of it. The biggest thing I would say that I think differentiates him and Wemby, though, and the reason why I'm still picking Victor Wembanyama is because of the overall impact that he has on team defense. The biggest difference between perimeter centric defense individually, 1-on-1, more so Dyson Daniels cup of tea versus someone like Victor Wembanyama who plays more of a rim protecting role is how it affects the other players around them. The effect of a rim protector, in the same way we've seen with Rudy Gobert, is when you have somebody who deters from the rim as much as he does, it also creates a bigger advantage for those on the outside to be able to be more aggressive, allows them to be able to act in different ways that they probably wouldn't in man-to-man situations outside of having an elite level rim protector. And Rudy Gobert is actually a really good example of this, because I would never say that in Utah he really played around plus defenders, yet their team was always top 5, top 7, even number 1 sometimes in NBA defensive rating and opponents points per game. That had a lot to do with how Rudy Gobert dictated the offensive play style of the opposing team. I would say unequivocally there is no way in the world anybody is going to go to bat for saying that San Antonio has more than maybe 2 other positive defensive players on their roster across the entire roster past Victor Wembanyama. The only 2 that I would probably possibly point to would probably be Jeremy Sohan, and unironically, the rookie Stephon Castle has also been really good on that side of the ball as well, perimeterly.
Yeah,
Chris Paul's been okay, but like let's not sit here and act like he's still like some level of defensive savant.
yeah.
And Harrison Barnes has been able to hold up relatively okay. Again, not a guy I would necessarily lean on. So we only have 2 other guys that you would view as net positive defenders on that team. Yet here, Victor Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs are at 16th in defensive rating and 15th at opponent's points per game. So middle of the pack with only 3 plus defenders is insane. You go to the Atlanta Hawks, we're talking about Dyson Daniels being an elite level perimeter defender. They're second to last in opponents' points per game, and they're right around middle of the pack still, so I'll give them that, but they're 18th in defensive rating. I would say that's one of those things that obviously you can't point to one player individually, but I would say that's the biggest difference is the impact that Wemby is able to have as a perimeter player to make the other players around him still look like plus defenders despite not having the archetype. It's not as transferable as Dyson Daniels being an elite level on ball defender in a way that 1-on-1, I trust him against anybody. But his ability to create a defensive hub around him, it's a lot harder to do. It's much more difficult to create a defense around a perimeter player than it is to create a different defense around a rim protector. And obviously that's one of the things that hurts Dyson's case. But Jalen Williams's point and Marcus's add on to that point of having a perimeter centric DPOY is one that I do think, although we shouldn't just be handing out awards for the sake of handing them out, I do think this is something that is worth a little bit more consideration, because I think that that's an aspect of defense that's not being discussed enough. And we have a lot of perimeter defender, lockdown level defenders in a league that's so favored towards the offense, that guys who play elite level defense need to start getting more grace. I think it's one of the best things that happen in making teams like the defensive play, all defense team, and even all the regular All NBA positionless again, because I think it creates more of a conversation.
No, and that's 100% the reason why. The Jalen Williams clip that you guys are talking about, I 100% agree with them. They started renaming a lot of their awards, especially with the Eastern Conference MVP, sitting with the Western Conference Finals MVP. If we had like a Gary Payton like perimeter defense oriented award versus like a Dikembe Mutombo, Ben Wallace, that sort of award for the big man, I would be okay with this. But Jay also talked about it in his argument. You cannot build a hub around some like a perimeter player. It's just too hard to have that be kind of like your defensive anchor being out there in the perimeter. Victor Wembanyama changes everything that teams have to do against the San Antonio Spurs. When he's on the court, that opens up so much more for the other team. He, for me, is the clear defensive player of the year, and it's hard to kind of take it away from the big man at this point because they affect so much in terms of overall team defense, where them being the hub is changes everything that another team has to do. Where on the perimeter, to be honest, if you like when you think of the best defenders of all time, what is the best way to do it? Just take it to the other side of the court. You can't really do that with like Victor Wembanyama when he's roaming around the paint and getting almost 4 blocks per game. He averaged freaking 4 blocks per game in the month of January so far. So I think Victor should be honestly no unanimous defensive player of the year. I think Dyson Daniels deserves some love. I have him currently as my number 2, but until they change this defensive player of the year award, and if they actually like follow through with the Jalen Williams thing, where it's perimeter centric versus rim protecting, two different awards, it's going to favor the big men. That's why I also think that Evan Mobley is actually like giving himself a good case, like in the top 3, potentially top 2. So I have a Victor Wembanyama. I do want to see like potentially in the future these two different awards, but you cannot take away the way like the impact that he's had on the San Antonio Spurs and how much they rely on him on a night to night basis, and the fact that without him, like their
I don't
defense
know if I'll
literally
be a
falls to like
fan
the
of
bottom 7 of the league.
2 Defensive Player of the Year awards. I think that cheapens the award. It's I feel the same about like the people. I feel the same about the people in the NFL who like there
It
needs to be
cheapens
like
it.
a best
Yes, it
quarterback
does.
award and then an MVP award. Like no, like if we're gonna be an MVP, that's the MVP. If we're gonna be defensive player of the year, it's defensive player of the year. But again, I just think, and again, there's nothing like Wemby's probably going to win the award, and I'm not saying this as a way to say like he shouldn't or he doesn't deserve it because I think that he does. But again, if we're living in a perimeter centric NBA right now, and I 100% understand the point about the defensive rating and the way that Wemby affects the defense for the team, not just individually. Like I totally understand that. If you want to go off of the Rudy Gobert model, you certainly can, because I think that also works to his advantage. Because to Jay's point, there are not really any other consistently reliable defenders that you can point to in San Antonio. I 100% agree with that point. But again, in a perimeter centric NBA, the best perimeter defender in the league right now is Dyson Daniels. He's having a historic season, and for that reason, he should get some consideration. I think if he can keep this up, I don't know if it'll be. It would be hard to justify. It would be hard to justify
It won't be
a
unanimous. It
unanimous
won't be
Defensive Player
unanimous.
of the Year award for Wembanyama if Dyson Daniels continues to do what he's doing. Again, we haven't seen it in 30 years. And I know what Wemby's doing, we haven't seen that in 30 years either. But if the metric is, if the goal of every defense in the league right now is stopping the 3, then I'm going to point to the guy that's been doing that better than anybody. And that's been Dyson Daniels. He's been the most disruptive on the perimeter all season. That's why I could change. I can certainly move off of that like in a couple weeks from now, 100%. But right now, like mid-season, I think Dyson Daniels deserves some love because they've had some tough matchups, perimeter wise over the past couple of weeks. They've seen the Knicks a couple times. I think they've seen the Celtics a couple times as well. They've at least run into the Thunder, I want to say once or twice. Like when you think about all like the heavy hitting 3-point shooting teams, they're all in the East. Like Dyson Daniels has to see these teams several times a year, and he's doing well against those teams. So
No, 100%. I mean, also he has one of the best freaking defensive nicknames in the league, the Great Barrier Thief. So he definitely deserves some love. I just think that again, I mean, Victor Wembanyama probably does have like a bigger overall impact on defense overall. We're gonna move on to the next award though, and we're gonna be talking about the Rookie of the Year. Rookie of the Year has definitely been a contentious award this year because it feels like it's been changing every single week. We thought we found our winner in Jared McCain, but he ended up going out with a torn meniscus for the remainder of the season. So I'm going to throw it over to Jay to start it off here. Who do you have winning Rookie of the Year in this very up and down race so far?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm really not a fan of anybody definitively right now, and this is one of those that I think could change on a regular basis.
Okay.
And TV, maybe you can help me with this because I've brought up his name a few times on the podcast, but there's two guys in particular that I think are kind of vying for the top spot right now. One guy is one I've already brought up on the podcast this episode in particular already. That's Stephon Castle, who I think has been a relatively good point guard slash shooting guard for the San Antonio Spurs so far this season. The other one is Jalen Wells. Jalen Wells, it kind of dabbles into that same conversation that Marcus was just having about the importance of Dyson Daniels as a defender on the wing. And although he is a rookie, he has been tasked to guard some of the best players in the NBA so far this year in a way that they
Yeah.
haven't even trusted Marcus Smart to do very much when he's been healthy. I think that's really important. I understand that Jalen Wells, neither one of these rookie stats necessarily are screaming off the page in a way that makes you feel like, yes, they're the rookie of the year, in the way that we were talking about Jared McCain, for example, right? Who was a guy who offensively really made you feel his presence and feel his value on a team that, with Tyrese Maxey and Paul George not shooting the three ball very well and Joel Embiid missing significant time throughout the season, he was kind of their heartbeat for a little while. But Jalen Wells, just to give him some respect, 11.8 points per game, 3.5 rebounds per game, just over an assist per game, 44, 38, 81.8. And I think the most important thing too on the 3-point attempts is, although the volume is nothing crazy right now, because I wouldn't say 5 attempts is too insane in this version of the NBA. Shooting 38.8% from that distance in 26 minutes on the floor as a guy who's mainly tasked with being a lead perimeter defender for that team, I think is really important. Now, the other side of it is Stephon Castle, who I guess is the guy who, I just checked the sports books, he's favored to be the leader for Rookie of the Year. Hilariously enough, they're both in the pluses. There are no minuses. So Rookie of the Year is clearly still up for grabs. There's no definitive leader in that space. But for Stephon Castle, 11.6 points per game, 2.5 rebounds, 3.6 assists, 40, 25.8, 71. He's a guy that's gotten much more tick, not in terms of like on ball reps, not nearly as much tick as Jalen Wells on the floor itself. They both played about the same amount of minutes. Probably has had more ball handling responsibility. Another guy mainly tasked with defensive capabilities. So I think if you're looking at two perimeter centric defensive guards, Jalen Wells of the Memphis Grizzlies has been the more effective guy, despite the fact that Stephon Castle is at the top of the list in the sports books right now. That's the guy I would go with, but I have to tell you, this has to be one of the nastiest rookie of the year races I think we've ever covered. Not just on this podcast, but since I've ever started podcasting. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, before I throw it over to Marcus, I'm going to agree with you here. I'm going to go with Jalen Wells as my Rookie of the Year because it feels like with the amount of like movement there has been in the Rookie of the Year, there's been one guy who's been consistently in the mix, either one or two, and it has been Jalen Wells. Like you mentioned it with Marcus Smart, they brought him in to be that backward mate next to John Moran, up on the defensive end. They don't really. Jalen Wells has made Marcus Smart expendable at
Yes.
this point. At
Mhm.
this point for the Memphis Grizzlies, and he's doing it. Well, I mean, 5 attempts per game as a rookie from three, shooting 39% from three is actually pretty good, pretty solid for someone that young. And he's like you said, Jay. He has tasks to carving the best guard on every single night. He's doing a damn good job at it. Funnily enough, the Memphis Grizzlies did actually pick up a win tonight, today versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. And he's just been honestly one of the most consistent rookies of the class this year. Some people want to say Alex Sarr is finally picking it up. Stephon Castle has been good, but Jalen Wells since day one has been like the most consistent guy. And I think although not an overwhelming, not a sexy rookie of the year race, I still think that he deserves the spot at the top of the table. But Marcus, who do you have winning rookie of the year?
Very underwhelmed by the options. So if it were up to me, I would pick Jared McCain.
Yeah, yes, it's very
He's gonna
underwhelming.
miss games, but
I was gonna say, okay, so can I use this as a jump off point for something? Because I actually was thinking about this prior to the podcast, and I think it's kind of an important thing to delve into. Is there a weird version of this conversation where actually Jared McCain is quietly making his rookie of the year case without his presence? Actually, like his presence, not like his lack of presence on the floor for the Philadelphia 76ers, but more so his lack of presence within the rookie of the year case has actually further accentuated our issues that we had coming into the season with the lack of talent pool in this rookie class. The fact that Jared McCain, a guy who wasn't even heavily considered in the top 10 and coming into this season when we were talking about potential rookie breakout guys, the way he was able to burst on the scene and then be so effective prior to his injury made it where it was like, wow, we finally have a guy to cling on from this class. He disappears, and it brings back that realization that this class was rated significantly low coming into the year, and we've only gotten further validation of that with Jared McCain out. I think with Jared McCain playing so well, it kind of made us start to want to look at the rookie class a little bit more. Oh, Alex Sarr's picking up. Oh, Jalen Wells is playing well. We like Stephon Castle. Look at Zachary Risache. He's starting to kind of put things together as a perimeter player for the Atlanta Hawks. I've been a big fan of Bub Carrington. I remember when Dalton Connect was getting a whole bunch of burn in the beginning of the year in terms of this conversation, right? We were paying attention to the rookie class a lot more because we were finally starting to see rookies that were hyper impactful in a league that kind of watered them down coming in because nobody viewed this class as having elite level talent. Now that Jared McCain is not in that mix, we haven't paid attention to the rookie class as much. And you have people like Marcus who can definitively and unequivocally say, I don't care who wins rookie of the year because as far as I'm concerned, nobody has necessarily earned it. And I
Look,
think that's a fair take.
I mean, like this, the best thing I could compare this to is Malcolm Brogdon winning it over Joel Embiid, right? He put like Joel Embiid played like 31, 32 games that year, and people were still considering him like rookie of the year, even because I mean, if you remember the stats of Malcolm Brogdon, he averaged like 10, 4, and 2 throughout that season. That's a
The
member.
problem, the different, and that's a very similar comparison. But the biggest thing that makes it so different from that is that we may not see Jared McCain for the rest of the year. And so now we're relying with a smaller sample size, and B, a lot of what have you done for me lately, recency bias that's unfortunately going to skew any views. I mean, obviously, also games played is going to hurt Jared McCain just by
Yeah,
itself,
yeah,
right? In
yeah.
terms of eligibility.
He's just ineligible now to like even like win.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. If you look back to the Joel Embiid year, he would have been considered ineligible given the current rules. So that makes it where it would have. That's where it makes it even more difficult, is because we can't even consider Jared McCain, despite the fact that he probably
Yeah,
has been the most effective rookie so far this year. At least
yeah.
they had an out to say who's the other guy besides Malcolm Brogdon, because clearly nobody else has really stood out, and you could reach to a guy like Joel Embiid. This season, you can't even do that. So now we're just stuck with a pool of players that we're not even fully sure about being worthy of the award. And we're going to end up going with somebody who nobody really feels strongly about.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, like we knew this coming in when terms kind of teams his rookie class. It's going to be a lot of you know good role players coming into this. Like maybe some guys, there a couple guys will get maybe an all star here or two, but that's kind of the state of the rookie of the year now. Now that we don't have it like Jared McCain in there, and like Marcus said, no one is like really like overwhelmingly stand out. So at this point, does it really matter? But we're gonna give it to Jared McCain. Sorry, to Jalen Wells just because of like how consistent it's been all year. For the Grizzlies. Let's move on to the next award though, and this award again. This is gonna be this is an interesting one because you could definitely go two ways with this one. Most improved, the most improved player of the year award. There are a couple of candidates here that you could go with. People there's been a lot of discussion on social media that they don't like the direction that the most improved player of the year is gone. But I'm interested to see where you guys go with this. But Marcus, I'm gonna throw it over to you.
Jay should go
Who
first.
do you have winning most improved player of the year? Okay, Jay, who do you got?
Fair enough. It's another one of those awards that I feel like goes between two people. And particularly the guy that I'm going to definitively pick as my winner is Cade Cunningham. But the other player that I have on that list is Evan Mobley. TV, you know how I've been raving about Evan Mobley the last
Yeah,
couple of weeks, last couple of episodes, in terms of his impact now on the offensive end. Now that he's been given the not necessarily the keys, but he's been given a real green light in a way that I don't think
offensively,
was
yeah, for
yes.
sure.
I don't think JB Bickerstaff really maximized him in the way that he is being utilized now offensively as a guy who's being trusted to be able to bring up the ball in the fast break, make decisions with the ball in his hands and pick and roll, being able to make more offensive reads, not only in order to create shots for others, but now being more aggressive as a guy going to the basket for himself. Evan Mobley has put together a really strong year for himself offensively while still remaining as a plus defender. That's one of those biggest things that we talk about with any player, but especially with bigs, when they start to become more offensively centric, they step further and way away. They step further and further away from the basket. We saw this with Serge Ibaka, right? Who I'm not trying to compare Serge Ibaka and Evan Mobley as overall talents, but one of the most interesting things about Serge Ibaka is he was considered one of the best rim defenders in the NBA for about a 3 to 4 year stretch with the Oklahoma City Thunder. And it once came where he started to step further and further away from the basket, shooting threes, kind of stepping into like a Chris Bosh kind of bag. And as he started to shoot more threes, he became less effective around the rim, both as a defender and as an overall deterrent, a guy that you just didn't even view as really a threat, as even as a minimal shot blocker after a while. Evan Mobley has remained as an elite level shot blocking threat, a guy who can still step on the perimeter and defend at a high level, but now it shows you this offensive bag we thought about when we first saw him as the Tim Duncan, Anthony Davis type of athlete coming out of USC that we were looking forward to out of the draft. The biggest thing for me though is look at Cade Cunningham, man. Look, let me tell you something. This guy has stepped into an elite level offensive generation role when it comes to being able to create for himself and others, and it comes down to roster construction. This is a guy who's always been a high level decision maker and has been an aggressive shot creator for himself, dating back to his time at Oklahoma State. But there's also something else that dates back to Oklahoma State. The man hasn't played with spacing in like 5 years, bro.
Yeah,
Like the dude, even dating back to Oklahoma State, he never had elite level spacing of any kind around him. He comes into a season this year with at least maybe not accentuated talent, but high level talent from 3 point shooting, from a 3 point shooting perspective. Malik Beasley having a career level year shooting from beyond the arc. Tim Hardaway Jr., Tobias Harris, Jaden Ivey was having a career year from three before he went down with injury. He started to see high level spacing in a way that created a much easier framework to work with on the floor, not in terms of just being able to create for himself, but also being able to just generate positive offense for the Detroit Pistons. And they're already having what I would consider and what I think a lot of Pistons fans would consider a very strong year. They can mess around and miss the playoffs this year, and I think they would have accomplished all three things. That third one being a little tricky. We've talked about it on the podcast before, but they'll have accomplished all three things that they wanted to gain out of this year, which was one, defining whether or not Cade Cunningham was an elite level talent and a guy that you can truly build your franchise around, not just a guy you give the rookie max. I think that's being told. Is Jaden Ivey a legitimate number two? I think he did step into a real role where that's a guy you could trust at the two spot. And number three is figuring out what they decide to do at the center position. That's going to be the trickiest one. But I think the biggest one and the most important one is that Cade Cunningham has arrived not only as an all-star player, but a guy that we might end up even considering as an all NBA player at the end of the season. That's not a conversation we were having a year ago. We were not talking about Cade Cunningham in this light. And I think that although some people have gotten a little hyperbolic about where he ranks in the point guard rankings amongst all players in the NBA, this is a guy who is coming for at least a top 10 spot. And he's looking like a top 10 caliber player at the point guard spot right now.
no, 100%. And in terms of like how the most improved player has gone the last couple of years, I think that Cade, Evan Mobley, even to a certain extent, Jalen Johnson is like all deserves like some love at those positions. But I'm gonna get to Marcus soon, but I'm gonna give like my winner of this award because I feel like we're losing the charm of most improved right now, man. I feel like we're giving it to like these top picks who we expect to do good, and when they finally start to reach that peak, I mean, when we look at the John Morant, when we look at like some of these other players who have been able to win the award, maybe not Tyrese Maxey, but like something like there's we like, if we give it to someone like Cater Mobley, it feels like this is part of their projection, and winning most improved doesn't really fit. Like that's not like what the most improved player is all about. So for me, the winner for this year, let's change things up. Give me Norman Powell. Give me Norman Powell to win Most Improved Player this year because I think this is having his best year of his career, missing out on Paul George, still staying as efficient as he is for a fifth-seeded LA Clippers team, averaging 23 points a game. People thought that this was going to be a one-month thing, but he has been able to maintain this to the point where he's having borderline all-star talks this late into the season. I think that Norman Powell has been like the most consistent guy alongside James Harden in terms of the offensive end for the Clippers, and in terms of actually like improving his game and getting like that opportunity. I think that I have him winning Most Improved Player of the Year. Now, do I think he's actually going to win it? No, I actually think it's probably going to be someone like Kate Cunningham or Jalen Johnson. But in terms of like finding like what made this award so like interesting, especially like from years past, when we look at players like a Lamar Odom, a Bobby Simmons, when we look at like some players who came out of nowhere like Giannis back in 2017. I think Norman Powell kind of like fits more of that mold, and that's kind of where I want to see Most Improved Player get back to, compared to like what we've been getting lately of the defensive with the voting for Most Improved.
TV, you had me and then you lost me, bro. Like we
Where
were,
you
I
wanna
thought
go?
we were, I thought,
Or you want me to respond to that?
I thought we were getting to the right
Yeah,
answer.
I actually I
really,
agree with
really
that,
did.
by
I
the way.
thought we were getting to the right answer, and then you lost me. Norman Powell,
Yeah.
shout out to Norman Powell. He is averaging a career high in points. He's averaging 24 points per game. But TV, you as a Raptors fan, watch Norman Powell average 20 points a game in the 2019 season. He averaged 20-ish points a game in the 21-22 season, and he averaged 20 points a game in the 21-22 season. This is nothing new from Norman Powell. The only reason why we're seeing Norman Powell have a career year averaging as far as points per game is because of Paul George's departure and also the absence of Kawhi Leonard for the majority of the beginning of the season. And somebody needed to help James Harden carry the load. Yeah. That's the only reason why Norman Powell is having the season that he's having. If you look at his splits, he's shooting 50% from the field. This isn't the first time he's done that in his career. He's shooting 49.3 to be exact. He gave me 49.5 in the 1920 season, 49.8 in the 2021 season, and he shot 50-ish% in the 21-22 season as well. So this isn't the first time we've seen him do that. He's shooting 45% from three. Again, not the first time we've seen him shoot this prolific from the field, and he's always been for all of his career good for roughly 80% of his free throws. Like there's nothing about Norman Powell this season statistically that's any different from anything we've ever seen before. The only reason why the points per game numbers are popping out of the page at us so much is because of the absence of Paul George and the departure of Paul George rather, and the absence of Kawhi Leonard for the better part of the season. So I was a little bit shocked to hear how that started and for us to land on Norman Powell. Norman Powell is a product of a dysfunctional Clippers organization that is also unhealthy. And he's just doing what we've always known that he can do, which is be a reliable third or fourth option and a reliable scoring threat if you really need him to. That's all he's been. He hasn't been anything different this season in LA than we've seen in years past.
I'll let you respond first, TV, but I kind of lean that way, but I want to hear your response first.
Oh no! I was just going to say that like this is not him being a number 3 or 4 option. He has been in terms. I know that James Harden has been like running the offense, but he has become the number 1 scoring option over there in the Clippers so far, like throughout this year, and it's actually like resulting into wins. He is like he's shooting like an all-time like volume in terms of 3-point shooting, and he's still maintaining the percentage. Like the only time he's like reached over 21 points a game, and if you're looking at it, is the 5 games that when he joined the Clippers back in 2021-22. He has been a reliable 6-man for most of the year, from most of his career. He has come into the starting lineup, and not only has he upped his points per game, he's become like a more reliable offensive player for this team, and is a huge reason why they're still able to be in the top 6, top 6 team in the West right now.
I wouldn't say that.
I don't think I disagree with your point.
Norman Powell's improvement as much as it is a product of the roster having changed from last season to this season. Again, Paul George isn't there anymore. If Paul George is still on this basketball team, Norman Powell's not starting every single game this season. That's not happening. Norman Powell is still doing what he was doing last season, coming off the bench and being a reliable scoring threat in limited minutes. You look at how many minutes per game he was averaging last season. He was averaging 26 minutes per game. This season, he's averaging 33 minutes per game. In all the seasons prior, where he was averaging at least 30-something minutes a game, again, we go back to the 2020-2021 season, he was averaging, 17 points per game on a team coming off of on a team in Portland. Obviously, had Dame and CJ McCollum, I believe, was still there in the 2021 season as well. So, like, not nearly the number one option, right? So, again, no disrespect to Norman Powell, because I love what I've been seeing from Norman Powell. But, again, I don't know if I would attribute Norman Powell's success this season to him having made improvements as much as it would attribute it to the roster having changed, and now he's just the next logical guy to come in and fill those shoes. So, I mean, it's no different than, it's no different if, let's take DeAndre Jordan, for example, right? Let's say Jokic goes out with a season-ending injury, and DeAndre Jordan steps in as the starter now, as center in Denver, and goes back to doing what we've seen him do previously with comparable minutes. Like, that doesn't mean DeAndre Jordan's become most improved. That's just next man up. I got to do what I got to do to help my team win. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm like, besmirching the name of Norman Powell, but if he were still doing this coming off the bench with Paul George still on the roster and a healthy Kawhi Leonard, and this was last season, I would be inclined to agree with you that he was most improved. But this is just, somebody has to start. And someone has to start at the 2. And it just so happens to be Norman Powell. And he's taking what we've already known him to be able to do and just doing more of it and doing it better with more minutes.
I'm looking at his game and seeing how he's getting more. Like, I guess he is getting more opportunity, but he is still like performing in terms of efficiency at like a high level. Yes, he is like kind of like just like expanding on more minutes, but at the same time, he wasn't penciled in to be like that number one option. He wasn't like he would he wasn't even a guaranteed starter coming into this year, but he still has been like providing bigger output. But I do want to hear like what you have in terms of who you have like winning the most improved, because like you said, I was going towards the right direction, but like who did you think I was going to say instead?
Dyson Daniels last season averaged 6 points a game. He's averaging 13 points a game right now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's where I thought you were gonna do as well. I thought you were gonna go the route of either going. I thought you were gonna go with one of the two Atlanta Hawks guys. I thought either Dyson Daniels or Jalen Johnson.
Jalen Johnson's my number 2. He's my number 2.
Jalen Johnson's case is a little stronger. When you look at Jalen Johnson right now is averaging almost a 20 and 10 double-double. There are not many players in the league this season that are averaging a 20 and 10 triple-double. Yeah. And again, he's been effective. He's shooting 50% from the field, 33% from deep, 74% from the free throw line, right? He's he's consistently been a 50-30 guy from three-point range and from the field goal range respectively. But again, with the departure of John Collins from this team via trade, I think one of the things that Atlanta need to figure out, even though they're still very much a middle of the pack basketball team, one thing I think that they needed to figure out is who was going to step in and fill that John Collins role. And if you ask me, Jalen Johnson has filled that role beautifully, right? To go from averaging 16 and 9 last season to averaging 20 and 10 this season, that doesn't seem like a big jump, but his role has greatly changed between last season and this season, right? You look at even a Dyson Daniels. Yes. Again, Dyson Daniels in New Orleans was like a nobody. He was averaging 6 points a game. He was, he wasn't really impacting winning. He only started 16 games in New Orleans. This season, he's already started double the amount of games he started in New Orleans last season. He's actually started more games this season in Atlanta than he started in both of his first 2 years in New Orleans combined. And again, he's impacting winning. I talked about earlier how he should be getting a little bit more favored as it relates to being in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation. A career high field goal percentage. Normally what we see happen with players in basketball is as their volume of shots increases, their percentage tends to go down. Not only is he averaging a career high 12 attempts per game, he's hitting them at a career high rate, 46%. Still a pedestrian 31% from three, right? The free throws have taken a tick, but again, 13 points per game and the first player in almost 30 years to average 3 steals per game. Dyson Daniels, to me, is the answer. Like, if I'm giving you a most improved player ladder, I'm going to go Dyson Daniels 1, Jalen Johnson 2. To Jalen's point earlier about Cade Cunningham, I 100% agree that Cade Cunningham has certainly made massive strides as a player, but same thing with the same thing with Cade rings true with Norman Powell. If you look at what Cade was doing even last season, Cade was averaging 23 points per game last season. He's averaging 24 this season. So again, the points per game hasn't necessarily been a major jump. His efficiency hasn't necessarily taken a major jump. The difference is, to Jalen's points, is this team now is functioning a lot better. Like, these pieces are actually meshing together a lot better. And so now Cade looks like he's playing better. And I think that's been the trap that over the past couple years, voters have been falling into. Is it's not that these players it's not that these players aren't improving, but if you're asking me who the most improved player in the league is, I'm talking about a guy whose role has been greatly expanded and he's still able to rise to the occasion and fill that void. Cade Cunningham was the first option last year. He was the first option the year before that. He was the first option the year before that when he was drafted. That hasn't changed. This roster has gotten better, and so now Cade's game looks more fluid and it looks better, and they're winning more games, so we're talking about it more. But statistically, not much has changed. Dyson Daniels has literally become an impact player on a team that is going to be a playoff team, yes, or they're going to make a run for a championship, not this season, and maybe not the next couple of seasons, because there's a lot of things they need to figure out in Atlanta. But again, if you're asking me who the most improved player is, to your point earlier, Steven, when you started, it needs to go to a guy like a Dyson Daniels, who we didn't think Dyson Daniels was going to be. Correct me if I'm wrong. We didn't think Dyson Daniels was going to be some superstar, game-changing cornerstone of a franchise. Coming out, he was drafted 20th? He was drafted in the top 10. He was a lottery pick. He was drafted 8th overall, right? But we didn't think that he was going to be. Yeah, he was a lottery pick. My bad.
Yeah, he was
a lottery pick. He was a lottery pick. He was a lottery pick
in New Orleans, not with a team that at that time, obviously, has Zion. Obviously, they still have Brandon Ingram at that point. I believe they still had Jackson Hayes at that point also. Like, that was Dyson Daniels was supposed to be a complimentary piece to that big three. They shipped him out of there, in exchange for DeJounte Murray, and he's proven, I can actually be a reliable asset on a fringe playoff team. So Dyson Daniels should certainly be MVP over guys like Cade and over guys like Norman Powell. Unfortunately, though, as the trend has told us, Cade's probably going to win the award.
I did.
Okay, so that's where I wanted to. That's the jump off point. That's actually what I wanted to say. Is if I'm picking based off of what I think voters would do, it's the reason why I went with Cade Cunningham and Evan Mobley as two guys that would be at the top of my list. If we're talking about their overall improvement as impact players, I think that's been the most notable thing about their seasons individually, is what they've been able to do now when they've been given a more expanded role. I think you mentioned it earlier with Cade Cunningham's actual statistics not necessarily improving, but I think his reliability on the offensive end particularly has been raised, and I think his ability on ball has been something that's become more prominent this year, mainly because now he can become an elite level decision maker. He doesn't have to focus strictly on how he creates offense for himself, because he has more space to work with, because he has more weapons to work with. And I do get how that also adds to the narrative around him. The same thing can be said for Evan Mobley. I agree with you. If we're going to the actual tried and true of what the actual award is, I agree with you. I would say that Cade would still probably be third for me, but I think Dyson Daniels and Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson, by the way, probably should have won it last year. Let's keep it a bean. He probably should have won it last season. Those are the two guys that I thought TV was going to mention based off going back to the tried and true. I think the other thing that needs to be mentioned about the Norman Powell thing, and I think your overall point, TV, about his overall impact on the LA Clippers, especially a team that we thought was going to be dead in the water after this season. Let's be honest. They started out the year without Kawhi Leonard. They start the year with the Paul George trade being one of the biggest talks in the NBA. And the question was, how far from grace would the LA Clippers fall, right? I remember we had a conversation on this podcast where we said, wow, people are making graphics where the Oklahoma City Thunder can mess around and take the Clippers pick and use it to draft Cooper Flag. Remember we had that conversation?
Yeah.
That's how far from grace people thought the Clippers were going to fall. Yet guys like Norman Powell have been able to step up in a real way next to James Harden and make this team very effective. Granted, I would also say Ivica Zubac is a guy who's in DPOY conversations for people this year. James Harden is not getting enough love in the All-Star conversation that I think maybe he deserves this year. I think there's other things with the Clippers that carry that narrative. Norman Powell, I think, is an expanded version of a role we've always seen him thrive in. I think the biggest difference now is that his name comes up second in box score as opposed to third or fourth like we've seen in the past. Another thing, when you go down most improved player winners list, is there's not too many players who are this far into their career who win most improved player.
No,
And the
no,
main
I
reason
just
why we don't see that
for sure.
consistently is because it is more of a young man's award. I think that's the one part that doesn't need to get lost in this is I do think a third, fourth, fifth year player is deserving of being able to win most improved player, which is why I think the Cade Cunninghams, the Evan Mobleys, the Dyson Daniels are at the top of that list. But the last time we saw a guy who we saw this deep into their career win most improved player was probably what Julius Randle in 2021, and that was mainly because the boy was shooting he was literally shooting every line off the basketball humanly possible from 3-point range that year. That was the biggest thing because it was a legitimate change in his game as a guy with the New Orleans Pelicans, and even dating back to his time when he was originally drafted by the Lakers, he was more of a bully ball around the basket player. And when he got to that point in 2021 with the New York Knicks, where he shot the ball at a high clip from beyond the arc that year, I think this was his second year with the Knicks by this point. I'm not entirely certain, but nonetheless,
Yeah,
when
second
he
year, second
expanded
year.
his game to being more of a perimeter level player and being able to shoot the three ball at a high clip, it was like, wait a minute, okay, we get that you're far into your career, but Julius, you're having like a Blake Griffin and Detroit Pistons level of a game change. Like you're going from a guy who's more of a around the rim player to legitimately adapting to the times of the game that deserves being rewarded. That's the last time we saw anything of that ilk. Norman Powell doesn't have a change of that significance that makes you feel like there's a legitimate change worth calling him most improved. I think the point that you're making is a point we would mainly make for him in a six man of the year convo. Him averaging XYZ amount of points, doing it as an effective second or third option on a high level playoff caliber team. Those all sound like things we talk about when we talk about six man of the year. When you talk about most improved, I think you talk about role change. I think you talk about responsibility change. I think you talk about, like Marcus pointed to with Jalen Johnson and mainly Dyson Daniels. How did we view you last year versus how we view you this season? And like Marcus said beforehand, with Dyson Daniels, that was a guy who we were wondering what his overall role with New Orleans was, to the point that we weren't even sure where he fit on the roster. And clearly New Orleans thought the same thing. Now you see him on the Atlanta Hawks, and he's considered a guy that probably is up there with former teammate Herb Jones. Alex Caruso probably is another guy that we talk about heavily. There's a couple of other dudes that we probably can go down the list of, but when we start having that conversation of who the top perimeter defender individually one-on-one is in the league, Dyson Daniels is in that conversation. We weren't talking about him like that when he was in New Orleans, and I think that conversation shift alone carries his most improved player, like, not
Yeah, no, yeah,
debate,
no,
his
he's
case. His
yeah,
case.
his case, yeah, 100%. I again, these are all great options. If I truly think like who, I mean, like Kate Cunningham is like right now is like the odds on favorite to win most
Yeah.
improved. If I think like who I truly think that truly deserves to win, it's gonna be Jalen Johnson. I really hope he ends up does winning it this year. He deserves a lot of love for like becoming that second option and legitimately a guy that Trae Young actually like trusts. Like especially in the years that DeJounte Murray was there, they couldn't figure things out, but now he's found his number two guy in Jalen Johnson. But all these guys are great options. Let us know what you guys think down below. Who you think should win that award? Couple of awards left. We'll go with one more award before we move on to the NBA All Star starters. Coach of the Year.
That one's a lot
No,
harder.
we also have six man of the year. We have two more awards. We have
Oh,
two.
okay. I was gonna
We have,
say. Do you want to
oh
just
yeah,
do Coach of the Year since we're on it?
yeah. So since we're on Coach of the Year, we'll go with Coach of the Year. Lots of great options, but I'm actually going to throw it back to Marcus here. Who do you think is going to be who's the Coach of the Year at the midway point? Okay, go ahead.
Fair enough, man. I can't be mad at it. This one is a really good list, and I'm not gonna be mad if anybody refutes my pick because I just think there's so many guys to go with. But can we give Jamal Mosley some love down there with Orlando, man? I genuinely believe that this is a guy who is being under discussed in this conversation. When you
Oh, he's
talk
number two
about
for
the
me.
fact
He's
that,
number two for me.
yeah,
He's number two.
I understand that there's a lot of teams that have stepped up in a real way. Shoot, I've heard JB Bickerstaff's name a lot just because the Detroit Pistons don't look like a
Yeah.
complete crapshoot compared to last season, right?
Yes. Yes.
Obviously that's a good name, and I've heard a couple of other interesting names. Mark Daigneault
Udoka.
with the
Udoka.
Oklahoma, yeah, Mark Daigneault with Oklahoma City, Ime Udoka with the Houston Rockets this year. But let's really put this in perspective for a second. The the Orlando Magic are 23-21. This was a team that for the good majority of the season was in the top four in the Eastern Conference, still only a game back of the top 4 in the Eastern Conference, by the way. In a year where they missed a significant amount of time with Paulo Banchero, who just recently returned, Franz Wagner has missed time, Jalen Suggs has missed time. Those are those are their 3 top players on their roster this year. And they have been able to maintain a top 7 record. Granted, I understand that it is in a Eastern Conference that has been relatively watered down this year. Nonetheless, you play the games that are in front of you and they're doing it without their elite level talent. Let's talk about some of the things that this team is also doing, being that they're still a young squad that is second in opponents per game and third opponents points per game, and third in defensive rating this year. This is one of the best defensive units in the NBA. And although their offense has struggled, they've still been able to be they've still been a team that has been able to be in the top 8 in the Eastern Conference. This team is playing and punching overall above their weight right now. And I think as they continue to get healthy, they're going to become more and more dangerous. Jamal Mosley's ability to coach this team, specifically on the defensive end, has been one of the more impressive things of this year to me. And I think that it's one of those conversations that's not going to be held as much when we get to that point in the year where we're really starting to weigh who our top 3 and who our top 5 are. So, although I don't think he's going to win, because I just feel like there are an insane amount of really great candidates, even Taylor Jenkins, for example, who's dealt
Yeah.
with a similar set of issues in terms of significant injuries across his roster. I just want to give Jamal Mosley his love earlier on in the year because I know his name is slowly going to fall out of grace as the year continues. This is a guy who's been coaching his ass off without 3 of his better players on this roster throughout the course of this season, and is still managing to have them as a team that I think is going to be a threat come postseason time when everybody does get healthy.
No, I 100%. You already like you mentioned it. He's like he was like number 1 for me. Like if you even talk about a couple weeks ago, he's just like now that the Magic are continuing to fall and all that. It's like what's really sucks about the Jamal Mosley case that the injuries are catching up to him, and it's actually like making a huge effect on this like Magic team. Where yes, they're playing good defense, but they've like even struggled to even crack 100 points in some of these games. That's how bad their offense has been, especially like with the amount of injuries that they had. So yeah, he's gonna start to fall out of favor, especially with the amount of like surprises we've had on both conferences. But you got to show him some love. I like that you chose him over there. But for me, I gotta choose Kenny Atkinson, because mostly if you really think about last year and the injuries suffered with Darius Garland missing a lot of time, Evan Mobley missing a significant amount of time. People thought the best plan of action for this Cavs team was to go with the 3-point shooting route and potentially move off of a Jared Allen, maybe move a Darius Garland to really maximize his team and like build around Donovan Mitchell. Instead, Kenny Atkinson has come in and has made everything work. We have no more discussions about having to trade Darius Garland, having to deal with this 2 big man lineup. He's made everything work. You talked about it with Evan Mobley a while ago. He has made him into he's like allowed him to expand his game offensively while still having defensive impact. Jared Allen having a borderline all-star season. Donovan Mitchell not having to like exert as much energy in the regular season because Darius Garland is actually playing well offensively beside him. And all of this has changed since Kenny Atkinson has become the head coach, number 1 team in the league in terms of record. And in terms of surprise factor, we talked about it the day before the season. We knew that the Cavs were going to bounce back after an injury-riddled season last year. Did we think they were going to be this good? No, we did not. And the Kenny Atkinson's even punching they were punching above their weight than what they thought than what they even expected before the season. So I'm gonna have to give it to him. Marcus, who do you have as your coach of the year?
Are on pace to win at least 60 games. The last time the Cleveland Cavaliers won 60 games, LeBron James was playing for the team. That's how long it's been since the Cavs have been this good. And when you look at it, obviously they started the season off with 15 straight wins, and then they followed up after a little bit of a rough stretch to finish off November, and then going into December, they routed off 12 straight wins before they got just absolutely slapped around by the Pacers. The Cleveland Cavaliers are a bona fide NBA Finals contender this season, and it's not just because they're at the top of the conference, but like when you look at it, and I think there's one move that they should make. I hope they do make it before the trade deadline that can really stamp this and make this not turn into like a sour milk take. But they are the only team equipped to beat the Boston Celtics in a 7-game series in either conference. I don't think there's a team in the West that can do it. I certainly don't think there's a team in the East outside of Cleveland that can do it. I think if they trade for Cam Johnson, that'll be even much better for them. Because Dean
We're on the
Wade.
same page.
Yeah.
We are on the same
Shout out
page.
Dean Wade,
Yep.
but I don't know, bro. I can't believe you said that with a straight face.
He's been
That's
great
amazing.
this year, Dean Wade. Look.
No, I look.
It's low reps, TV. Dean Wade.
It's like, no,
He's
it's low reps, but he's like,
we know he's
low.
destined to get injured, bro. It happens
No,
every year. I got hyped with Dean Wade last year, and he got injured right when I started to hop right back on the bandwagon. This is a guy who finds his way to not be in the rotation.
I mean,
right
look, you're looking
when
at
you
a
start
team,
to get excited
about
about him.
Obviously, the postseason is going to be a major indication, but this is Kenny Atkinson is not a bad coach. And if we think back to the last time we saw Kenny Atkinson really making this many waves, it was when he was in Brooklyn with D'Angelo Russell, and the only reason why Kenny Atkinson got fired was because KD and Kyrie didn't want him, and they wanted Steve Nash. That's fine. That's how the business goes. But I'm so glad that this is the team that Kenny Atkinson is with, because you have a guy in Donovan Mitchell who we've seen, despite having some serious bad luck, whether it's with injury in the playoffs, with his contemporaries, or just being outplayed. We know that Donovan Mitchell is a playoff riser. We've seen him give us all-time great. I don't want not all-time great, but like borderline all-time great performances in these postseasons. We're seeing a guy now in Darius Garland.
You're right. Yeah, you're definitely still right.
Finally, actually looking like a competent number two in that backcourt. That was my biggest concern coming into this season. Is we know that Donovan Mitchell can do it in the backcourt, but can Darius Garland do it in the backcourt? And then we've seen Darius Garland have his fair share of big games. Obviously, I think his biggest game so far this season was in the 40-point game against the Raptors, and what was in a game that was a lot closer than it probably should have been, if we're being completely honest, between the Cavs and the Raptors. And they certainly could have, but nonetheless,
the Raptors should have won that game. I watched that game. The Raptors should have won that game.
When you've got a competent backcourt mate for Donovan Mitchell, when you have two guys up front, down low, in Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, who are crashing the boards and are still double threats in their own right. The reason, and again, not to pick on Dean Wade, but the reason why a trade for Cam Johnson will be so much better, because the wing position now in the NBA, I feel like we've gotten back to the point where wings are starting to become important and feel important again. And I think if they're truly, as I said earlier, going to be able to fully match up with the Celtics, they're going to need a guy that you can go out there and trust a little bit on an island with a Jaylen Brown or a Jason Tatum in one-on-one scenario, ISO scenario. Dean Wade's not that guy, and neither is George Niang. So I'm really, hoping that the Cavs do, in fact, pull the trigger and do whatever they need to do to go all in on Cam Johnson, because that makes them all in on a championship in my eyes. But to keep it to the Coach of the Year conversation, undeniably, Kenny Atkinson is Coach of the Year. I think the only other coach, in my opinion, that is in Kenny Atkinson's stratosphere is Ime Udoka. And this is no disrespect to Jamal Mosley, but we saw Jamal Mosley do this last year with the Magic, and it was very similar. They were a solid team for the course of the season. They dealt with a little bit of injury, but they were still, I think, fourth or fifth in the East last season. They're I think 6th or 7th right now. Like, they've been pretty consistent. I think they'll probably win more games this season than they did last. But I would say if it's not Kenny Atkinson, it has to be Ime Udoka. This is a team that, and I didn't even know this, they're second in the conference, bro. This is they're second in the conference. I didn't even
you almost forget that sometimes, right?
Speaking of defense with the Rockets, the Rockets defense has been
against the Grizzlies. They were like I'm like, they're second in the conference. What are we talking about? The Rockets are second. You got Jalen Green finally looking like a superstar guard this year. You got Alpi. Again, I said earlier about Jalen Johnson, there's not many people in the league right now averaging 20 and 10. Alpi is one of them. And I love myself some Şengün. Like, he's playing great. Dylan Brooks looks like a competent basketball player and not just some villain who's out to get on everybody's nerves. Like, this is if you look at it, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They have 8 players in their rotation averaging at least double digits. I do think they should give Cam Whitmore a little bit more run, because I think he can be a little bit more helpful than just 10 points per game. 100%. I think Cam Whitmore.
Facts. Preaching from the back, Marcus. Been saying it all year.
I think they'll let him get a little bit more run once postseason time comes. You're going to want to make sure that everyone stays healthy and not get hurt or anything. But 8 players in the rotation averaging double digits. Jalen Green's impact player. Alperen Şengün, impact player. Dylan Brooks, for crying out loud, impact basketball player. Like Kenny
Competent
Atkinson
player.
deserves it because the Cavs are on the verge of doing something for the
For
first
real.
time, and I think in a little over a decade. I think we're talking maybe a decade exactly since the last time we've seen the Cavs be this good in the Eastern Conference. In the Eastern Conference, while still watered down, there is still a very, very daunted team in the Boston Celtics that we have to acknowledge as the champions. But if it's not them, it's the Houston Rockets. And barring a massive, massive letdown and collapse, I actually think as the season goes on, the race for Coach of the Year between Kenny Atkinson and Ime Udoka is going to get tighter. If somehow Ime Udoka and the Rockets finish with a comparable record to the Cavs, I think you might see some people want to give that award to Ime because, again, this is a really, really young basketball team. Like, who expected the Rockets to be this good this fast?
Yeah.
I certainly did not. The Rockets last season were a clean 41-41. They were just outside the playoffs. They've gone from being 41-41 to being second in the conference at 28-14. They're going to blow their win total from last year out of the water. They're going to clear it. Might even clear it before All-Star break. Like that's how good they've been. But my vote would go to Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson deserves it.
Yeah, 100%. Those are definitely two good choices as well. And the Rockets, man, if we're talking about a team that needs to consolidate some of their roster, they, like me and Jay talked about this before the season, they have like 11 playable guys. There's just not enough space. They have freaking Reed Shepherd dropping 40 points in the G League right now just because they have no space in the rotation for him. So, I mean, like they're in a good spot. What we talk about top defenses with Jamal Mosley, the Rockets have a top defense there, so he definitely deserves some love. Let us know what you guys think. Oh, who should win Coach of the Year down below. Last award that we're going to talk about here, and we're going to talk about the Sixth Man of the Year award. This is going to be an interesting race this year, but Jay, I mean, we talked about it earlier in the season. We thought that Buddy Hield was going to run away with it, and now the Warriors want Buddy Hield's head. At this point, the turnaround for the turnaround for Buddy Hield is absolutely crazy. But Jay, who do you have winning Sixth Man of the Year this year?
The answer is Peyton Pritchard, bro. And I feel like it's not even close, honestly. This feels like one of those where Peyton Pritchard has just been exuberantly productive for the Celtics off the bench. Has taken a points per game jump, shooting the three ball at a good clip. Been a guy who's been really effective as a guy they can trust to run offense when Jason Tatum and or Jaylen Brown are off the floor. Just one of the most effective scorers off the bench in the league. I know there's a handful of guys that fit that mold. Malik Monk, Norman Powell, before he started to kind of really assert himself into the regular rotation. There's a handful of guys that obviously we can have conversation about as scorers, but I think that Peyton Pritchard's ability to run the offense for a Boston Celtics team that's one of the best in the league so far this year is just really important and very impactful for them because I think everybody always falls in love with having the conversation about their top five because it's one of the scariest top fives you could walk out on the basketball court any given night. But the fact that they have a guy like Peyton Pritchard to come off the bench and be able to keep the offense afloat in that way, not just as a scorer, but as a guy who can just keep things running, it's a very underrated thing to do on a team that's so good. And I think he's just super valued. But I want to throw this out here too because of the fact that I think Peyton Pritchard is just like so definitively number one. We really have to like at some point I might even just have to do a video for the TikTok for this TV, so remind me at a different time, but we really have to do a deep dive on the Atlanta Hawks season this year because DeAndre Hunter has also burst back onto the scene
No,
and I
no,
love that for him.
okay, and that's what I was going to go
Yeah,
to because
I love that for him
because I think
yeah.
that DeAndre Hunter should win Sixth Man of the Year.
Oh, you think he
But
should win? Okay, I think he's
here,
definitely top 2, top
here,
3. Yeah.
my only issue is he's already missed 14 games this year.
Yeah, and that's
So,
why I kind of left him out is because I'm wondering how he will be affected by eligibility by the
eligibility.
NBA.
That's my only
Yeah.
issue with DeAndre Hunter. But the fact that this man moved to the bench in favor of Zachary Ricochet, their number one overall pick, and is averaging 19 points a game on 42% from three, 4 rebounds, he has reinvigorated his career. People
Yes.
had him on the trade block for like the past. We talk about John Collins and the Atlanta Hawks on the trade block for years.
Right.
Hunter has been in those discussions forever. And the
Yeah.
fact that we're like, okay, they have Zachary Ricochet now, he becomes more expendable. No. This guy's coming off the bench and is one of the best, if not the best, six man so far this year. Still has a defensive identity. And look, even though he's coming off the bench, he's still ending games for the Atlanta Hawks. He has become a big shot, a big 3-point shooter for them. Again, on 6.5 attempts per game, 42%. again, this is the best season of his career, and I don't know how much this says to kind of him as a player if he like has the most success in his career coming off the bench, but if he can make that threshold of 65 games, I think Payne Pritchard definitely deserves some love. I think if we're talking about guys who are playing like night in night out, he probably is going to win it because he's gonna make the threshold. But if he can make it, DeAndre Hunter, well, which is again, he's had such a long injury history that's going to be really tough. But if he can make it, I think he deserves to win it.
I think the other thing too is not only does his improvement coming off the bench make it easier to grandfather in Zachary Risacher, it's also taken a lot of responsibility off of Bogdanovich to be a secondary shot creator on the
Yeah, he's their
perimeter
seventh
as
or eighth
well.
man now. Yeah, he's like their seventh, eighth man now.
Like it puts them in a position where they have real interchangeability for size on their roster, and that's something that Trae Young has never really had before. He's never really been in a strong position where he can work around interchangeable roster, work within an interchangeable roster where he can be next to a plus defender at all times. Whether it's a Jalen Johnson who is a good defender, a DeAndre Hunter who I believe is an elite level defender when he's really locked in. And of course, we know what Dyson Daniels means to this team defensively as well. Marcus has touched on it multiple times throughout this podcast. So I think it's really important. Like I said, the improvement of the Atlanta Hawks individual talent this year needs to be studied, bro. Don't get me wrong. Marcus said it beforehand. This is a team that I don't think we're going to be having real conversations around in the postseason when we're talking about being a team that's going to make some insane run or anything like that. I don't think they're the team they were back in 2021 or the Pacers last year of this team that kind of seemed like they were a regular season darling that then kind of takes that into the postseason and gets some good breaks. I think the Hawks are going to get caught. But in terms of the regular season, talk about a really good jump this year after going into the postseason. TV, remember all the fake trades for Trae Young to the Orlando
Yeah.
Magic and the San Antonio Spurs? Remember all of the things being discussed about about Bogdanovich possibly being a Laker by the trade deadline? All of the conversations about the Atlanta Hawks maybe having to hit a hard reset and trying to get their picks back from the Spurs to really put themselves in a position to kind of start from scratch. This is a team that now is sixth in the Eastern Conference, a real chance to not only make the postseason but at least be dangerous in that setting. And they're seeing a bunch of their guys who are the young talent they're going to need to improve in order to continue this trajectory with Trae Young. They're seeing those guys actually step up. DeAndre Hunter is having a healthy year and playing really strong off the bench. Zachary Risacher has actually been pretty okay. Not rookie of the year level or anything, but it's been a really good
Solid.
rotational player
Solid.
for
Yeah.
them. Yeah, and then we've already talked about Jalen Johnson and Dyson Daniels on this roster as well. Onyeka Okongwu is another guy who I think has quietly been very solid at the center position. I think this is a team that's maybe one or two pieces away from making more noise, especially because they still need help on the wing, and I think they need a real center to replace Clint Capella, in my personal opinion. But this is a team that has really seen strong improvement across the roster with their youthful guys, and has made them relevant in a year where a lot of people thought they were not going to be heard from. The Atlanta Hawks need to be studied, but I think it's between Peyton Pritchard, DeAndre Hunter, and I think Malik Monk is always and forever going to get love in these kind of conversations because of the way he scores the basketball. Those would be my top three.
Yeah, but also shout out to Malik Beasley. He was also on my short list. He's actually been very
good. Malik Beasley's in there. I just think Detroit's only going to get but so much love, and most improved player seems like the closest it's going to be.
Exactly. Marcus, who do you have winning most improved?
It's DeAndre Hunter.
I was most improved six man of the year.
All the reasons that Jay
six man.
I mean, you're talking about a guy again. He was serviceable as a starter last season. He averaged 16 points per game last season. But when you are in again, taking more shots with as many minutes, but you're coming off the bench. And again, as I talked about earlier, we don't usually see players take more shots and their efficiency increase, right? Last season, DeAndre Hunter was taking 11 shots a game. 5 of those were threes. This season, he's taking 13 shots a game. 6 of them are threes. Last season, he's shooting 46% from the field, 38% from three. This season, 47% from the field, 42% from three. He's gotten better. And again, I've said it 5 times now throughout the course of the night. DeAndre Hunter the Hawks are by no means not going to really be making much of any noise in the postseason. They might make the postseason, but they'll be out by the first round. But DeAndre Hunter is certainly, in my opinion, 6 man of the year. I think it will end up going to Peyton Pritchard just because I think will end up happening. DeAndre Hunter has 3 more games that he can miss this season with the new rule before he would be considered ineligible for the award. It's
a small window. It's a small window.
I mean, for the most of his career, when you look at his numbers or his career, like generally, I mean, he's been dealing with injury, but he's played at least 65 games at least once in his career. So I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility for him to do so. He had a much larger role on the team at that point in 2022 when he did it. But I say that to say, if it comes down to a scenario where DeAndre Hunter finishes the season without missing any more games, and Peyton Pritchard does as well, I think Peyton Pritchard will probably get it because DeAndre Hunter has started 2 games this season, and Peyton Pritchard started no games this season. And something very, very bad would have to happen in Boston if Peyton Pritchard is starting basketball games in Boston. Something seriously wrong has happened to Drew Holiday and Derek White. Like something bad has happened in Town if Peyton Pritchard is starting basketball games. So I think he'll end up getting it just because, again, they have a better record. But if it just off of impact alone, I've got a 20-point per game score almost in Atlanta. I've got, what is Peyton Pritchard averaging, 12 or something like that in Boston? Not to take 14, sorry, not to take away to what he's doing.
14,
DeAndre
14,
Hunter has been more impactful coming off the bench. And I think some people might hold that against him because he was formerly a starter. Like they might look at that and say, oh, we'll see, this is anything different. But I would say it's DeAndre Hunter because he's been playing he's been playing good basketball this season coming off the bench.
100%. Let us know what you guys think down below for who you think should win Sixth Man of the Year. We have one more quick award here before we end off today's episode. We're going to talk about NBA All-Stars on the TikTok, so be on the lookout for that. But we didn't want to talk about Clutch Player of the Year because we thought that was going to be like, I mean, Clutch Player of the Year is still like a new award, and it's definitely kind of dicey. But we're going to be ending off today's episode with what we think is going to be the highlight of the year so far, like halfway through the season. Basically, like what we think, like in terms of like there's just that one moment, what we think has been the best this year. Jay, what was your highlight of the year so far?
It's literally John Morant double clutch dunking, not even 48 hours after saying he wasn't going to dunk anymore. Like, I mean, it's just that because he's only built on it since then. We might have seen the highlight of the year just a week or two ago. I think, what was it, last week where he had the big boom that didn't count on Victor Wembanyama?
Yeah, can we just give that to him? Like it didn't even count, but can we just give that because that was
it's like points that should just be on the board for the sake of, sometimes there's certain dunks that just make you wonder how they didn't score, So I'm actually going with the first dunk instead of the more recent one with Wemby, just because I think it's the catalyst to what the rest of this year has looked like for John Morant so far, and I think it's going to be a takeoff point for him because it was really a point where people really thought John Morant was going to be transitioning his game in one way or another, and of course some people didn't genuinely believe it. It's just kind of built in that he's just one of the more dangerous players around the rim, but it's the mere fact that within 48 hours he was like, hold my beer real quick, in midair decided to make a decision that most would double clutch into a layup and just make it a more finesse move. This is a guy who continues to show us that he plays with more than finesse. He's a power finisher and one of the more dangerous rim runners when it comes to being able to finish around the basket that we've seen in the league. And he's a guy that can create for himself and has done some really special things. And that double clutch dunk for me, it was one of those things that said, like, no matter what happens with John Morant, like, he's still going to be the same guy all the time. And as scary as that is, as a guy who's like the biggest Derrick Rose fan in the world, so watching John Morant is like PTSD sometimes. It's also a reminder of how exciting his brand of basketball is.
No, it's 100%. There were like 4 or 5 like John Morant moments that I could have chose for highlight of the season. Even that 360 layup, if you want to remember from earlier in the season, that
right.
360 layup was,
or his game winner against the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah, that too. He had so many great moments. Like there's so many choices, even just on John Morant alone. So that's fair. For myself, I got to go with the Trae Young game winner from half court, especially with the fact that like Colin Sexton just hit a 3 right before that to try and seal the game for the Jazz. Trae Young casually one dribble pull up from half court wins the game. Reminds me, if you remember, the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander Devontae Graham game winner from a couple years ago, where the Shai like hits like a 3, and all of a sudden Devontae Graham hits a half court shot in order to win the game for the Pelicans. So it gives me that sort of vibes. But just for the craziness of that end of the game, I'm going to give it to Trae Young as a highlight of the year. Marcus, who do you have? What do you have as your highlight of the year?
We don't see that very often. I know it didn't count, but when you jump on us,
fair.
No, that is 100%.
They watched his homie Zach Edey do the same thing in the same game.
Whether it counts or not, that's certainly the highlight for sure.
Yeah, I need the NBA to just recognize that at the end of the year. I don't care if it didn't count; they just need to recognize it. That's all I care. That's all I need to see. So, yeah, honestly, if it like for the entire season, it's probably that John Morant dunk on Wemby because that was ridiculous. But yeah, let us know what you guys think down below. Highlight of the season. There was a lot of great ones to choose from, and especially like halfway through the season. Hopefully, we get some more in the second half. But boys, we finally reached the end of the episode. Thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna throw it over to Marcus. Thank you for coming on once again to the Hit Your Free Throw Spot, the first one of 2025. Where can these people find you? Your social links and everything. I'll let you take the floor.
Sports on Instagram.
Yes, you can definitely check him out. We're gonna put him on the story. We're gonna put all of his links down in the description down below. And I'll tell you this right now. This is not the last time you're gonna see Marcus on the pod. It's always gonna be. There's always some great debates. There's always some great talking of basketball when he's on. So we're gonna definitely bring him back on before the end of the season, and you're gonna see him a lot more often going forward. And Jay, any final thoughts on the episode?
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously, these award picks that we have right now are subject to change. We'll probably end up having at least minimum one more episode like this, reflecting on some of the awards. Depends on if something changes, especially in terms of games played being something that's factored in now. So injuries really are going to matter. And I can't wait to kind of get closer to that trade deadline a date, because not only does that help us for the podcast and the algorithm, because we love talking trades, but I also think that there's a real chance that although we're not going to see a hyperactive trade deadline, I think that we're going to see a lot more meaningful moves at the trade deadline. And I think that matters so much. Marcus actually mentioned one of my favorite fake trades of the year, and it's for a team that I don't think has been discussed with Cam Johnson enough, and it's Cleveland. That's one of those kind of moves that's subtle. It's very calm. They probably don't even have to give up an insane amount in terms of their roster that is actively contributing on their team. Yet he's going to be a guy that when he steps in at the three position, a position we've been talking about for years and that they've been trying to
Yes.
kind of handle per committee. That's going to be a small adjustment that has big dividends paid at the end of the season for a team that has legitimate championship aspirations. Those kind of trades that are like very subtle, no real all-star movement, but are going to really affect championship caliber basketball on the floor. Those are the kind of trades I think we're going to see the trade deadline. So I'm very excited to see those. And of course, as you guys continue to tune in, as we get closer and closer towards the playoff push, the social media is going to also reflect that. The podcast episodes are also going to reflect that we're in that locked in mode that a lot of the NBA teams are as well. So expect a lot more uploads, not only of just the podcast, but especially on the social media pages of some individual thoughts that we have, some series coming up, and some other just overall interesting factors around the league that are going to get discussed with the fact that basketball is starting to get more and more serious.
100%, and you'll be able to find that all on the Hit Your Free Throws pod. Our socials can be found in the link down below. Our individual pages. We're gonna show some love over there if you want to see some of the other content that we have coming in store. And yeah, we'll be back next week talking some more NBA basketball. Once again, thank you, Marcus, for coming on the show. And we're gonna hopefully have you back in the near future. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hope you have a fantastic day. This TV, this is Jay, this is Marcus. We are signing out. Peace.